Welcome to The Secret Witch Show, the podcast providing a safe and alchemical altar space of conversations which help powerful women escape a half-hearted, spiritless society and rediscover the freedom of living a wildly magical life. Every other week, we explore how to cast aside the wounds of shame, guilt, and fear connected with fully being yourself, so you can grant yourself permission to stop hiding, ground soulfully back into your body, illuminate your whole soul desires, tend your soul, rediscover and reclaim your powerful gifts, express your magic, and manifest your wildest alchemy. There's no better place to become who your heart longs to be. This is where we will guide you into liberation. I'm your host, Nicole Barton, and I'm so excited to dive in. Welcome to the show, Magical Ones. Oh, do we have a delight for you today? But before we dive in, you might have noticed that I have slowed down a little and I'm creating these episodes more ad hoc. So I just wanted to let you know about some changes that I've been creating to bring my life back into witchy soul alignment. I'm still very much serving secret witches into their magic and souls. That's the work I'm here for. And I'm doing it from a much more soulful place, creating space for some exciting projects that I'm focusing on this year. I'm not going to share more of that just now. It's very exciting, but I'll share more in future. So that means that I've slightly slowed the pace of these episodes temporarily. There will be at least one a month still, and maybe still two, but they're going to be created from a slow, soft place of flow. So the place that I'm investing most of my time is inside my Secret Witches Apothecary membership. So if you're keen to liberate your inner witch and you want to start slowly too, join us there for just £33 a month and gather with your sisters in our Moonly Manifesting and Medicine ceremonies. Visit nicolebarton.co.uk/membership. On the Secret Witch Show today, though, our guest is the magical James Moran. James is an author, artist, and professional archetypal astrologer. He utilises archetypal astrology to help people make sense of what they've been through, understand the strengths that want to come from their challenges, and anticipate the themes and rhythm of growth ahead, all while helping people connect with the unity of all life. Having studied with the pioneering psychedelic researcher, Dr. Stanislav Grof, James began an adventure of growth that led him to spend several years living in India. Eventually encountering archetypal astrology, he began studying directly under Richard Tarnas and realised that his entire life he had been searching for a language to describe reality at its depth. He now utilises archetypal astrology to illuminate the interior depths of the human experience. In this episode, we explore what archetypal astrology really is, not as prediction, reassurance, or quick fix spirituality, but as a profound language of meaning and a map to the psyche. We speak about how archetypal astrology helps us understand why we've been through what we've been through, how difficult periods can be experienced as initiations rather than personal failure, and how we can consciously participate in the rhythms and cycles shaping our lives. We explore the relationship between astrology and the psyche, planetary archetypes as living psychological forces, and how reconnecting with these patterns can support healing, agency, and soul expansion. This conversation is a grounded, soulful exploration of how to meet life with a deeper understanding, integrity, and trust in the intelligence of the path we are walking. Let's dive in. Welcome, James. It's a delight to have you on the show. I came across your work about a year or so ago, I think. I found it fascinating because it was called Archetypal Astrology. And I love all things archetypal and see the world in, I think, a very similar way to the way that you describe your own work. So I'm excited to dive in deep with you to explore how we can harness archetypal astrology for healing. So welcome and thank you for being here.
Yeah, I'm excited too. Thank you.
Absolutely. So I always start, because I was just explaining before, the premise of my own kind of work is that people's stories are often so healing for others. And I believe that we're all archetypal remedies for each other. And so my first invitation, if you would like to accept it, is to share a little bit about your own journey with archetypal astrology and how it's kind of helped you to heal, expand, and live your soul path.
Sure. Yeah, going back into my developmental years when I was a child, I think around adolescence, I started to have a agitated mind and a mind that was uh, just very like suffering, I guess. And I got attracted to topics like spirituality, so I could understand what I was going through, and also depth psychology. And I got exposed to the work of a a researcher, a doctor named Dr. Stanislav Grof, and he worked with. He was part of the active research in the 50s and 60s, and a little bit in the 70s with psychedelic assisted healing. And I was fascinated by people kind of delving into the depths of their psyches, and so I pursued that with a lot of fervor. Even when I was in high school, I would probably study outside of school more than inside school on topics like that. And then I was fortunate to meet him. He was conducting what's called holotropic breathwork retreats at the time, and he was kind of like on tour around the United States. And I'm from the Washington D.C. area. He would come there once a year. So I got to know him a bit, and then I ended up going to college on the West Coast because that's where he was located, and for some other reasons, like it's beautiful. Um, and so there in college, I actually got very much interested in yoga and meditation because the field of psychedelic assisted healing was not active very much in the 1990s. Like there was some underground activity, but it wasn't really a thriving field with current research coming in. So I went in the direction of yoga and meditation, and that took me to study abroad in India. It took me to live in India, and I basically just continued my depth research on myself, I guess you could say, through those avenues. And then when I was back in the States, living in California, teaching yoga, a childhood friend of mine recommended a book to me on astrology. And I'd never given credence to astrology. I had read a couple kind of horoscopes in the newspaper in Santa Cruz, where I went to school, California, that I found interesting. But other than that, I didn't see the point of looking at something so far away to try to understand something so close as my own life. Um, but he was like, "You got to read this book." And so I read the book. It was called Cosmos and Psyche by a gentleman named Richard Tarnas. And I just got hooked. I mean, the writing is excellent, so it can hook anyone, but I got like hooked beyond the writing because it's like a 500-page book or some long,
Wow.
it's a very long book. And I devoured it. And I also felt, as I was reading about the archetypes of the planets in astrology, I felt that I was being introduced, or I was encountering a symbolic language, a language essentially made of particular set of symbols, and that actually felt familiar to me. It felt like I know this. This is something that is not strange. It's something that's uh, it kind of intuitively makes sense. And so I ate it up, and then I discovered shortly thereafter that Richard Tarnas, the author of that book, was the protege of Stan Grof, the researcher. So they worked in tandem. And not only that, I was living in Oakland, California at the time, but they were still working in tandem right across the bay at the California Institute of Integral Studies, and also down south a bit in the Esalen Institute. So I went over there to both places, studied with them, returned to Grof's work, and then took up the study of archetypal astrology. And there was really no going back. I was very surprised that I was studying astrology, that I was into astrology, but the fire and the passion uh, just wiped away all doubt. I just really dove into it, and shortly thereafter started practicing with clients.
Mm.
And that was about, I don't know, maybe 16, 17 years ago. And since then, I've been yeah, working a lot with archetypal astrology. I mean, that's really the main thing that I do.
I love that journey because it's like just this kind of brilliant, like I can feel the depth and the brilliance just even from a young age of that kind of like exploration of these things. There was a couple of things that stood out that I want to
Mhm.
ask you about.
So,
I think before I do, actually, I would love for people to maybe understand what archetypal astrology is, because I think that'd be good context. And there's loads of places that I want to dive.
yeah, sure. So archetypal astrology is a branch of astrology. It's kind of a branch in the larger tree of astrology. It was developed by Richard Tarnas and Stan Grof specifically in the terms of the research that they were doing in the 1970s in terms of psychedelic assisted healing. They were looking for a tool that could help them anticipate the quality of material that would arise from the subconscious in a in a in a participant or in a journey, or as you say, um, the themes, the quality. I suppose because if you're supporting someone who's going through this depth of, you could say like depth of personal growth, depth of transformation of the psyche, spiritual experience, however you want to kind of categorize that particular healing modality and that experience.
Mm.
Um, they, as people who are supporting those people, anything could come up from the psyche. They essentially, in that practice, what gets catalyzed by this medicine is what they call an inner healing intelligence, which is innate within the psyche. So it brings up kind of material from the subconscious that needs to be healed, but it does so according to its own intelligence. And its intelligence is vast. It's just not something that they can anticipate. So, they could be supporting somebody could go into a very difficult experience. Another person could go into an extremely blissful experience. They couldn't predict what would happen. And they tried with tests because they were trained in the Western psychological field.
Mm.
And so they tried Western psychological tests, which proved inaccurate. And so then somebody suggested to them that they use astrology for this purpose. They're hesitant at first because they were, by the early 1970s in the United States, the Controlled Substance Act was beginning to come into action, which essentially makes the psychedelic medicines illegal. And so their research essentially was getting marginalized. And then if they took up astrology, they were afraid to get more marginalized.
Mm. Ooh.
But they checked it out. I think by that time, maybe people were aware that Jung had used astrology in his latter
Mm.
career with his
Mhm.
clients. And they checked it out and it turned out that was the tool. That was the tool that helped them understand, or rather anticipate, kind of like the quality of the material that would arise from the subconscious and also some of the themes.
Mm.
Not like exact, but just gave them a general sense of themes and qualities. And then they were surprised to discover not only that, it also helped them understand through looking at what's called the birth chart of an individual. It helped
Mhm.
them understand larger overarching themes of the whole person's life.
Yeah.
Challenges they've been through, strengths they've garnered, or potential strengths that are being asked of them from those challenges, stuff like that. Um, and they developed this form of astrology that they termed archetypal astrology. One of the reasons being that astrology you could as like a tree, as a tree of traditions that go back very, very far. I mean, it goes back into ancient Mesopotamia. It potentially further than that. Um, it that tree of astrology has lots of different branches and lots of different uses.
Mm.
You can use astrology for a lot of different things. There was like in medieval Europe, a very robust tradition of medical astrology. You can use it as a kind of a medical tool for insight. There's divination. There's kind of concrete predictive astrology. There's a lot of different uses of
Mm.
astrology. And
Yeah.
what they were applying astrology to specifically was to understand the psychospiritual growth path of the individual in that context that they were in. Um,
Mm.
and they noticed that when looking at what's called an astrological chart, there's a lot there in a chart. There's a lot of information there. And so they discovered not all of that information was as useful for their specific purpose of understanding the
Mm.
psychospiritual growth path. And then they in turn found out that there's information there that's extremely salient and really readily useful. And though that information focus on the planets,
Mhm.
the archetypes of the planets, and the positions of the planets in relation to each other. So each planet has an archetype associated with it in terms of like a symbolic uh, basket or umbrella within which is all different manifestations that are of resonant symbolism associated
Mhm.
with that planet. Um, and so there's the planets, and then there's the angular relationships to each other, or what you could call the alignments, how they align with each other. There's something called tense alignments, soft alignments. And they found that that really gave a lot of meat in terms of understanding the person, understanding both overarching themes of their whole life, and then specifically what is active at any window of time. And that's essentially why it's called archetypal astrology, because it's focused on the archetypes of the planets. Not that in archetypal astrology we don't look at other aspects of charts. There's things like
Mm.
zodiac signs, houses, but first and foremost, we take into account the planets, their symbolism, and the way they combine. That symbolism combines with each other through the angular relationship.
Mm. I love that. Yeah, there's so many questions. There's so many places I could go with that. But what I'm hearing is
Yeah.
that it kind of provides a way, or provides a language first and foremost, is what
Mhm.
is how you've described it.
Yeah.
To kind of go into the kind of depth psychology, I guess, and also provide a soul map, or a map to the psyche as you describe it, I think,
Yeah. Yeah.
which I think is so interesting. I really want to explore it. What I would love to explore first,
Yeah.
because I wanted to go
Mhm.
back to what I was thinking about when you welcomed yourself, was there was this piece about being surprised about going into astrology, which feels juicy to explore. I'm curious why. Like, what was it that surprised you? And I'm curious because I think often astrology kind of has this almost like preconception of being quite woo and like
Yeah.
airy fairy, and I'm wondering if it's that. It might be something else, but one of the things that I'm seeing about your work that's different from, say, how I would describe the quick fix astrology is that there's a real depth to it. So yeah, I'm curious, what was a surprise?
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, it's a great question. So, I guess even before I answer that, I'll just say that I do feel fortunate that I was surprised that I got into astrology, because it allows me to empathize with people who are totally turned off by astrology. Because a lot of my work involves talking about astrology, and some people are just not into it, dismissive. Not everybody. Some people are kind of curious, and some people are super into it. But if they're dismissive or critical, I really don't have a problem with that, because I empathize there. I guess you could say one of the reasons I was surprised, um, I mean, at the surface level, the reason I was surprised is just because I assigned a superstition quality to it, because
Mm.
simply because the planets and the stars are so far away, and I'm using them to understand my life. I was really entrenched in more, I guess you could say, entrenched in like a logic mind.
Mm.
I'm not
Yeah.
sure which side of the brain that is, maybe left brain, kind of a logic mind at that point in my life, which is basically like the first, 30 years of my life. So that's part of it. Another part of it is I feel that I was a child of our current paradigm, in the sense that the current paradigm says that this is implicit. It's not necessarily explicit, but it's kind of a subconscious script that we on Earth are exposed to during this period in world history, which is there's an understanding of the universe, and there's an understanding of the origin of the universe, that the origin of the universe is the Big Bang. There's a Big Bang, and then
Mm.
physics, which is kind of a highly respected discipline because it can be demonstrated. The laws that govern the universe can be demonstrated and can be observed through the practice of physics. And so physics says that there's this Big Bang, the universe begins, and then everything thereafter is kind of an interaction on a molecular atomic level, which ends up creating planets. And then you've got on Earth, the molecules combine in such a way that they created life. And then within life, they combine in such a way that consciousness was created. And that's what we are. We're living beings with consciousness. And implicit in that is this assumption that the universe itself is a material phenomenon. It's primarily at its base it's a process of physical matter. And the consciousness that we experience is actually kind of like a byproduct of this physical substrate, which is the base of creation, which is the universe, the physical universe. And so according to that, I was functioning along the lines that I think is a kind of a common maybe thing for people in the Western world, which is that I think through that lens, there tends to be a focus on the individual. Like if I'm going to understand, like my psychology exists inside my head, that's where my brain is. And that's where all these chemical interactions are happening. And that's where my psychology exists. So if I'm going to understand myself, I'm going to look inside. I'm like an autonomous unit, and I'm going to look inside myself in that way. And I practiced a lot of my exploration in my earlier years with that in mind, even meditation. Meditation was like looking inside myself to understand myself, but not necessarily connecting myself out to the larger world, like other people, the play of events happening on the planet, the universe. It was very much kind of self-centric exploration. And I got to a point, I think I looked deep enough. It's almost like if you dig deep enough down, if you're like, okay, the answer, the answer to creation is not up in the stars overhead, it's down in the earth below. But if you dig, and you dig deep enough in the earth below, you're going to eventually come out the other side. And again, see the stars overhead on the other side of the earth. And so with me, it's similar. It's kind of like digging. And I think I came out the other side, or I realized or rather life kind of ushered me in the direction of like the kind of like the Mobius strip. Like the Mobius strip is I don't know if you've seen it. It's like MC Escher has a famous drawing of it where there's ants on the Mobius strip. And it's essentially, if you take a strip of paper and you kind of twist it and tie it back to itself, the inside of the strip becomes the outside of the strip, which again becomes the inside of the strip, which again becomes the outside of the strip. And so the sense for me was like, oh, if I'm going to understand myself, I need to understand, like look outside, understand outside, it's not just me. It's not like I'm this autonomous individual. Like I need to understand outside. And that's when astrology started to come into my life and started to make sense. I think, at first when it came in, I was of the mind, I was still kind of like, why, like if you're looking at astrology, it's because something inside your mind is delusional and is superstitious and is projecting something out onto the stars. But then as I started to, in my own explorations, realize like, the consciousness, my own consciousness is not just inside my body and my mind. It's also what happens in the play of my life. My life is not just what's inside me. My life is the people I meet, the events that happen, the situations, the stars. Like this is all my life and this is all life. And so as I was beginning to have that realization, I came into astrology, and really Richard Tarnas so eloquently, just beautifully, poetically was able to capture that very kind of fork in my journey, like that very kind of like signpost in my journey. And then it was just, And then I just stepped out into just this vast field of understanding that opened things up for me so much. And so for that reason, I'm like really, really grateful to
Mm.
Richard Tarnas, Rick, as he goes by.
Yeah, I can really relate to that because that was kind of similar to you described earlier, this kind of like familiar, like, oh, this is familiar. There's this kind of ancient knowing. And I often feel like I was like Hahnemann, the founder of homeopathy, like in a previous life. Is that
Oh,
kind of sense of like, oh, yeah, this, I already know this. Like,
oh,
so I really relate to that. And I also think that what you said about that kind of resistance that you had is
oh,
really interesting. Because I do see actually that a lot of secret witches will often resist, their gifts and the
yeah.
gifts that we come here for. So it kind of makes sense to me that like you kind of felt that resistance because it's ended up being your life's work. Um, so yeah, and that logic piece, I think the secret witches are kind of like, yeah, they're like, can I really trust this? We had Dean Radin. I don't know if you know Dean Radin. He's a scientific researcher of magic
Okay.
on the show, and his episode was all about like how to know if magic is real. I feel like you would like his work if you if you don't know it already. Um, but yeah, so that's often a common secret witch thing of like, yeah, but it doesn't make logical sense. But I can really feel there's that sense of like I just knew. Even though there was resistance, and then you obviously just kept following those nudges. What I'm curious about, actually, given there's this kind of like mapping element,
Mhm.
was this kind of being your life's work, was that kind of in your own map, if that makes sense? Does that make sense?
Yeah. It does make sense. Yes. Yeah, there was a lot of, that's one of the things that validated astrology for me is as I learned about my own chart, I discovered things about myself that I didn't, uh, that I hadn't discovered or hadn't known through the practice of meditation, which really surprised me because I'd spent like, just, thousands of hours in meditation and self-exploration. And yet this practice revealed things to me that didn't reveal to me, which I was kind of shocked by.
Mm.
And there's a number of kind of revelations about my life. Like one that I'll just offer is beyond giving readings to individuals, I also have a propensity towards wanting to address that larger worldview piece that I kind of uh, settled on there for a little bit. Like kind of bring something into the collective, which is a on ramp into a different worldview. That it can make just as much sense as kind of like the materialist reductionist worldview. Doesn't
Mm.
have to be far out, it can be grounded, but just a different, yeah, different perspective on life that allows for a more connected experience of being alive and of being alive with others and with other life forms. And, yeah, so that's there as well because I felt kind of nudged towards that, but but that's a bigger energy, if I'm gonna be addressing things on a larger stage, um, that's different than working on a little bit of like a smaller container, and so I felt, um, I felt a bit like a little bit too much energy in myself trapped in a smaller practice. And then when
Mm.
I realized that that was, part of where I'm going with this is kind of broadcasting on a larger level, my energy felt calm. It felt like that was more aligned with my innate nature. And those things were all there in my chart,
Mm.
even before I necessarily saw them in my life, like there's aspects like, for instance, there's like a Sun Pluto aspect, there's a Mercury Jupiter aspect, and there's a like, um, yeah, I knew intellectually that like, oh, these have to do with kind of like being part of like a larger evolutionary wave. Um, but and so as it kind of guided me, it's kind of like I guess you could say affirmed affirms, and sometimes affirms things for me even before I realize it myself. I'm kind of like, oh, what is
Mm.
that? And then when it comes up, I'm like, oh, there it is. And same with my clients, I'll be like, there's something, let's see where that comes up. And then eventually it's like, ah, there it is.
I love that. Yeah, I can really feel the truth of that. One of the things that interests me actually is, and I think we started to talk about this before we pressed record just briefly, was the kind of whether there are any archetypal patterns that you see in people who are here to be healers or guides. So we talked about briefly the archetypal wounded healer, which very much feels to be an aspect of the witch as an archetype. Um, and so I'm curious, because we talked briefly about Chiron, like, are there any archetypal patterns that you spot, that would be, indicators that you are maybe here to be in that work?
For me,
Yeah,
or just for anybody?
and for anybody, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd say Chiron. I'd also highlight Pluto. Um, Chiron, I go in and out of using that in my practice because the consensus in the field is still not in consensus. But generally speaking, with Chiron, like what I tend to see is like I tend to see it in aspects with other planets that have their own complex. And so the complex might be something like I'll give you an example, like somebody having some kind of cluster of planets or some alignment that involves Mercury. And this will be like a client example, like the client had Chiron in aspect to Mercury and a number of other planets. It was quite a while ago, so I'm not remembering all the details, but um, and there was a piece there about uh, so Mercury has to do with the voice, has to do with speaking, has to do with conveying message, um,
Mhm.
expressing. It also has to do with like perceiving, listening. It's very much associated with the mind and data and expression of and transferring information. And so there was something there really about some childhood wounds about like I think it was like verbal,
Mm.
being witness to some verbal abuse, and how that had uh, kind of painted the mercurial archetype in a painful light, but through following the thread of where that went, there's actually kind of like a whole story of healing around that allows the voice and the expression
Mm.
to be a more whole conveyance of healing because of what the person had gone through.
Mhm.
Um, so there's a lot there that allowed them to develop that voice and develop their own voice and message that came out of having gone through that difficulty. Um,
Yes.
and really all the archetypes are like that. Like
Mm.
there's they all have oftentimes we see them activated in that way when there's what's called hard aspects or hard alignments or tense alignments, like particular angles where the planets are in tension with each other. And oftentimes what it looks like is that when we come into life, like the tension in that combination is inherent in that tension is challenge. Also though, inherent in that tension and inherent in that challenge is the potential to grow.
Mm.
Um, and so when we come into life and we usually like if there's some hard aspect, some tense angle, um, those that archetypal combination will be like kind of in our face as we come into life. Oftentimes, quite often with humans, and the way it shows up is like when we're young, it tends to show up outside of us because we have not yet digested and integrated that. We haven't really reconciled that tension and kind of like owned it in an empowering way inside ourselves. So it oftentimes shows up outside. Um, and it can look like we're at the victim of something from outside or we're at the behest of
Mm.
some force and it can feel like a disempowerment. But then through, being with that and kind of understanding that, growing, we hopefully, and as is often the case, even if people don't know astrology at all, just intuitively, people tend to unconsciously guide their lives in such a way that they're trying to get that archetypal combination, that energetic tension, and kind of wrestle with it, kind of digest it and integrate it so that it shows up in a way in their life that they feel empowered, that they
Mm-hmm.
feel that it's still that archetypal combination, but it's one that's owned, it's one that feels rightful. Um, and like I can give maybe an example if you like,
Mm.
kind of an
Yeah.
allegorical example, using the secret witch.
Yeah.
Um,
Please do. I love that.
yeah, so in that one, I would kind of highlight the archetype of Pluto. And Pluto, uh, oftentimes we can go to the Greco-Roman pantheon and mythology to understand some of these archetypes because they were so good at kind of mining the subconscious and having these archetypal combinations get expressed through their stories. Not just the Greeks. There's lots of cultures like the Indians or the Vikings or lots of different cultures. The Greeks were one of them that was very good at expressing that. Plus, oftentimes the names correspond. Um, and so with Pluto, that was the god of the underworld. And as such, the archetype of Pluto is associated with that which is hidden. So like when the gods divvied up, as it goes in the Greek mythology, when the new generation of gods took over, is like three brothers, I believe. It's Zeus, which is Jupiter, Neptune, which is Poseidon, and then Pluto or Hades. They decided to divide up the realms. You got the sky, the earth, the the ocean, the underworld, and I guess the world. And so Pluto opted for the underworld, but the agreement there is because the underworld is where the souls go after death and they go to transform into whatever's the next thing. He can't come up. You can't, like, the souls don't usually, when they go to the underworld, they transform, they don't just pop back out. And so the underworld is a place that you go that you don't return from, really. So Pluto, the agreement there was that he went there to stay there. And so Pluto as an archetype is associated with that which is hidden, deep, hidden, mysterious, just like death is mysterious. Like we don't know.
Mm.
It's kind of like beyond the veil. It's hidden to us, that information for the most part. And so, though there's also this aspect of transformation there. And so in our inner world as human beings and our psyche, oftentimes the Plutonic shows up in the way like, if I'll just use the example of the hidden witch, and feel free to correct me if there's
Mm.
inaccuracies, but there's a sense of like the woman, um, coming in to some extent to kind of like her powers, but there's something there that's like remaining
Mm.
hesitant. There's something there that's keeping that hidden.
Yeah.
And there's some type of shame or even like sense of rejection or sense of fear, or there could be a threat, like in the way that witches had, an era in human history where they were burned at the stake. Um, and so what can the kind of Plutonic reflected there could be like this thing that is, it's hidden, it's taken into the underworld, it's taken into the place that is the underworld. Like there's a reason that people, when they talk about crime, they talk about the underworld, because the underworld isn't just crime, but it's the underworld exists beneath the niceties of society. Like the
Mm.
niceties of society, the social mores is a different realm. That's a realm of more like making things acceptable. But the underworld is the thing where it's like more wild, it's less accepted. And so there's this sense there of oftentimes shame goes there because it's like, oh, this is something that, is not accepted. Um, at the same time, though, what exists in the underworld? Like if we look at the actual earth, if we look out over like a field of grain or something like that, like this placid earth seems so placid on the surface, but what actually exists in the underworld? When we see what's in the underworld released from the underworld, then you have a volcano. You have like a volcanic eruption where there's this elemental power that can transform a landscape. And so Pluto's associated not with just the mystery and what's hidden, but also that which is transformative and elementally powerful.
Yeah.
And so it's oftentimes on a path of, coming into this thing where it's like, oh, there's this thing it's a power, but it's shameful. It's not accepted. That in and of itself can be a fire of transformation. That can be a path of deep transformation, of actually walking that path and getting pulled into the underworld and actually like coming out on the other side transformed. Like, wow, I went into the underworld. I faced this place where I felt ashamed, and I burned up in the face of that and got transformed and came out the other side with this depth of power that is innately granted from that journey to the underworld itself. So it's like symbolically put a bow on top, everything corresponds, like by coming out the other side, the depth of the shame is proportionate to the depth of the transformation and actually the empowerment, which is associated with, coming out the other side and being empowered and having kind of a natural link up with that which is mysterious, that which is hidden, that which is esoteric, intuitive, esoteric, the esoteric powers. And so we can see kind of you can see like on one end of the pole, Pluto's associated with like, can be a challenging archetype. On the other side, it's a rewarding archetype to the exact proportion that we face the challenge, kind of like own the challenge, accept the challenge.
I love this. Yeah. I love that because you've just so beautifully put language put a different language, let's say, to the work of the Secret Witch. And because I often talk about, there's a whole episode as well on like death and descent and why the Secret Witch is secretly longing for it. So I love how you've just described that. And I always say, our wounds are where we find our gifts. So essentially, like that's what you're summing up through this other archetypal astrology language. So it's just magical. What I also love is this sense of like that reclamation of power, because I think one of the things that the Secret Witch struggles with often, and that I think is what archetypal astrology also kind of as a lens helps women to start to understand, is this idea of like, we often think of like, why did this happen to me? Whereas what we're saying is like, we're almost like meant to go through these experiences. I often call them material for liberation. Like those are things are in our map, so that we can reclaim the gifts of them, so that we can transform.
Absolutely. I mean, nothing says that better than the birth chart. The birth chart is the actual representation of the sky when you were born, and drawn in there is the raw materials of this whole story. And so it's so affirming, like the way I look at it, at least, it's like so affirming of the challenges we've been through, the strengths that want to come from us. And it feels lovely to me because it's like, look, the universe, the world, life has given you a reflection to guide you. It's given you a map. It wants you to grow, wants you to, it doesn't, it's like a tough love type situation. The mother doesn't want to make the child cry, but the child's got to put on a snowsuit if they're going to go out in the snow or whatever. You know what I mean? It's like, I don't think life wants us to suffer. But sometimes we have to go through what we have to go through to get to the other side, to see what gifts we've been granted that we can then contribute to the world.
I love that. And what occurs to me as well is what you said earlier about there's this inner healing intelligence. Because I think that speaks to the idea as well that often the Secret Witch will kind of come up to this initiation that's in her soul map. And I map souls in with remedies. So in similar archetypal remedies, which are kind of the homeopathic remedies, but in archetypal form. So I completely feel what you're speaking to. But there's this sense of like, we have to fix. And yet there's also like, I think what the archetypal astrology is again kind of providing evidence for is that there's nothing to fix. Like we literally have come here to experience this, and I think that's relieving for the secret witch in many ways, who has spent a lifetime trying to just fix and change
Oh
those
yeah.
initiations.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And in some ways, in my estimation, that's one of the greatest healings, because
Mm.
even beyond seeing the birth chart as a map that life has given you because life loves you and wants you to grow, reach your potential. Another way of looking at it is that that's you. It's a mirror of you. Like, you are not um separate from the sky. Like,
Mm.
you are we tend to think of ourselves like I, me, my name, who I am,
Mm.
I'm so wounded. Um, but when we like you, so stated, it's like when we get to the point um, of kind of understanding that this, this wound is not, the wound is a gift, and we can move beyond it. There's a larger, I feel, connotation there, which is that, oh, this wound is human.
Mm.
Like, when we kind of get on the other side of the wound, it's like, if we have a really identified s- identity with the wound, it's like we're standing on one side of it. But if we stand on the other side of it and look at it, realize, wow, that sense of wounding is human. That's the human experience, and that's that brings me closer. That thing where on one side, when I'm really identifying with it, makes me feel separate from all other people. But if I step on the other side and I look at it, oh, this is the human experience. It makes me feel unified with all other people. It makes me feel like, oh, the details are different, but the gist is the same for everybody. It's like
Mm.
we're all born through this journey of like having these egos and having them get wounded, and it's everybody. It doesn't matter what the political view is, doesn't matter what the nationality is, doesn't matter what the age is, it doesn't matter what the ability is or lack of ability. It's all there. And so that can, like, nothing heals a wound like accessing love inside ourselves. And that type of access to love, I feel, is like not just healing of our own wounds, but of other people's wounds, because it's like the archetypal wound. It's like,
Mm.
we're not it's not just my wound, it's the archetypal wound of life. And then we feel, oh wow, like, wow, this life is just an amazing opportunity to get together with our family, which is all
Mm.
these humans, of all different shapes and sizes. And
Yeah,
yeah.
I love that. Mm. There was there's a few places that I still wanted to go, and then we've got some questions from the group. So I'm just trying to see where to go
Sure, sure.
next. I think there's something around cycles and rhythms, because obviously we're constantly kind of in transit, I guess you could say.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
how does understanding archetypal energies help that?
Oh my God. I mean, on a practical level, um, it's like Google Maps or something. Like, if you use some type of map app, you got a bird's eye view on the neighborhood that you're in. You can find your way through it. It's just so practical. Like, I mean, I run my whole life by archetypal astrology, and as I'm sure a lot of
Mm.
astrologers do. It's like, I get a sense of my week ahead, the month ahead, this cluster of months, this quarter. You can really see, like, oh, this period definitely has a focus on um, this theme. This period has a focus on this theme. It's so much easier to plan just on a purely practical level. And then you can
Mm.
look at the new and full moons. That also gives you a sense of, like,
Mhm.
emphasis at certain times, rising emphasis, and kind of declining emphasis, and starts of things, culminations of things. So that's one level. And then another level is like rhythmic, like music. Um, and that is so much fun for me. That's more like the fun side because I like music. I like rhythm. I just really like rhythm and music and the cycles of all the planets, like the whole sky is just like, it's just such a complex rhythm.
Mm,
The most easy one and the most apparent one is the cycles of the moon, like to the
mm,
sun, which is the full and the new moon and the eclipses.
mm,
Um, Even if you're just with that, it's enough definitely to start with. It's like because it just gives such a sense of for me, I think of it in terms of rhythm and dancing because like, if I know the music, I hear the rhythm, I know my next moves, I know and each move kind of carries the momentum for the next move and it's all fun. So
mm,
with rhythms, that's that's the rhythm of it because yeah, it's constantly like there's beats, there's the new and full moons are like beats. They're like beats.
mm.
And then
I
the
love that.
eclipses
Yeah.
are like almost like symbols or something which are part of larger beats. Like if you have like in classic, I mean, just kind of mainstream music, they have like a 4/4 beat where it's like 1 2 1 2, or like 1 2 3 4, and then usually on the one or some other symbol, some other beat, you have like a symbol which
Mm,
emphasizes that. So it's like 1 2 3 4 1 2. So those regular beats would be like the new and full moon, and then the bigger symbol emphasis beats would be like the eclipses. um, the new and full moon, kind of new moon's a little bit more like beginning energy, like starting things. Full moon's like culmination energy, and then solar eclipses is like a bigger beginning energy or ending energy, and then like the lunar eclipse is like a bigger culmination. Again, the symbol emphasis. So um, for me, that's the way I look at it. It's both practical on one side in terms of planning, and then the other side is like it's like getting into the groove of life.
mm. I love that so much. I was just trying to work out in my head because I was thinking about archetypal Luna and her being as a remedy. That would be the remedy that helps people to get in tune with their own cycles and rhythms, and new moon, and for women especially, it's such a
Yeah.
vital remedy.
I mean, yeah. Honestly, I'll do everything according to the cycles of the moon. I mean, I'll even like trim my beard or cut my hair
Yeah.
or flip my nails with them according to the new moon. Going towards the new moon is more like paring down, going towards
Mhm.
a full moon is more like bulking up or whatever. Like there's just
Mm.
so many. Yeah. So I definitely know what you're saying. The rhythm of Luna is probably the principal rhythm on this planet. That's probably like
Mm.
the principal rhythm.
Yeah.
Like,
The other thing we do with remedies is we prescribe, I mean, traditionally homeopathically, I work with them archetypally
yeah,
and energetically, but when I was a homeopath, we would prescribe the remedies according to the day of the week as well. So, for example, heart remedies would be very Venus. So there's things like that which I find fascinating as well, but we've probably do a
wow.
whole other episode on.
That's wow, that sounds like that harkens back to that tradition of medical astrology. Because that
Yes.
the medical astrology was like then
So kind of linked
associated
into
with
anthroposophical kind of ways of like because
looking at
they
things.
yeah, they grow homeopathic remedies again anthroposophically, so very much in alignment with the planets, which has always fascinated me as well.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, I would love to hear more about the stuff that you do too, like the archetypes, the alignments with the moon. I don't know. I find it fascinating as well. So.
Me too. I'm wondering, before we move into the group questions,
Mhm.
is there anything so if people are like really resonating with this, like where's the best place for them to start if they've not kind of heard of this? Or because the other thing we briefly touched on is I think secret witches have tended to maybe approach astrology from again that quick fix place of like I'm going to go to a reader and they're going to tell me and then I'm going to be healed. Whereas I think what we're speaking about here is how to work with it ourselves for healing as well. So is there anything kind of like very practical? It might be a bit of a challenging question, this, but like, is there anything like where do people start? I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good point because there are some branches of astrology which are um, more like reinforcing of not being in power or not being feeling empowered.
Mm.
Like there's a lot of different approaches. Like there's like saying like that the planets exert a force on you, so you're kind of like at the behest of the planet,
Mm. Yeah.
or saying that you have a fate and it's very concrete and it's carved in stone. It's there in the planets. It's there written in your charts, and
Mm.
you just there's nothing you can do about it.
Yeah.
But it's still that certainty that you mentioned. The human psyche does have a need for certainty, which is associated with the planet Saturn.
Mhm.
Um, if there's too much leaning on the emphasis of the need for certainty, we can go towards that like highly predictive, where it's like I just want to know everything, and I just want it to be like concrete. I don't even. It's like against necessarily like notions of free will or something. It's not like
Mm.
I just want to know everything and just be very certain. Um, So that would be different. I mean, if you want to go towards that, there are those astrological practices out there. If you want to go towards, feeling like that there's something emitted from the planets that's altering your life, those traditions. But in terms of this tradition, um, where to start, uh, like in terms of the foundation of the understanding kind of philosophy is that you your life, in my wording, your life is an adventure. It's an adventure of healing or whatever, however you want to describe it. But
Mm.
it the charts, like the birth chart and the transit chart, are something that is offered to you as a map on this adventure that you're on. It's like to help you understand yourself and really come into empowerment and really feel quite legitimate in being yourself and being who you are and being a conscious personhood. Um and so there's that. If you want to uh kind of get started, there's on my website, there's a little tool where you can input your birth data, which is like your date you were born and the place that you were born and the time that you were born. If you don't have the time, you can still do it. But um, with that, you input that birth data, and then you get an email which describes the tense alignments that you were born with. So it'll describe those, you were born with this planet intention with this planet, and then you can click on it, and it'll just give you a rundown of what that planet is, what it symbolizes when it's combined intention with this other planet. It shows up in these ways. These are the challenges. These are the strengths. So you can kind of like
I love
recognize it in yourself, And then
Mm.
there's a follow up, which is famous people that were born with the same tense combination and how they express it in their life and work. So you can kind of use those as examples. And one of the fun aspects of that is that we as human beings unconsciously quite often gravitate towards celebrities, artists,
Mm.
speakers, politicians, creators that have the same archetypal tensions that we do.
Yeah.
We don't know that. If you don't know archetypal astrology, you don't know that. You just get
Mhm.
gravitated like musicians. You like really like this person's music. And then lo and behold, you look at their birth chart and you look at your birth chart, and you both have, we'll say, Mars square Pluto or something like that. Like you both have this tense alignment, and when something that attracts you to that person, that music or that actor, or that movie or director or whatever, is that through that artistic representation, they're trying to reconcile these tensions. They're trying to find ways and stories in which these tensions that they're dealing with in their life find some type of alchemical, like higher resonance or something like that. Um, so that's kind of a good starting point.
I just,
Yeah.
sorry to interrupt you there. I'm so excited that you've said that. Because one of the universal laws that is the kind of very foundation of the archetypal apothecary work is the universal law of similia similibus, which is like cures like. And so I always
Oh, yeah.
say people are remedies, and we're usually kind of attracted to those people who have got the same remedies as us, and also as healers, we're also remedies for those like us. So like yours like. So I love how like there's just different languages, but we're all pointing towards the same thing.
That basis of homeopathy is like, I think, fundamentally completely aligned with the practice of archetypal astrology, because it's really like, it's like if we have a tense alignment in our chart, like we use the example of Pluto, oddly, it's actually that troubles us the more we're unconsciously like kind of resisting it. Even if it's like, oh, I don't want to go there. There's a side of myself, I don't want to go there. But oddly, like the less we resist it, the more we actually be with it. It carries innately within it its own remedy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Love it. Okay, wonderful. Well, I'm going to ask you about your website in a minute because I think Secret Witches will love what you just offered. I'm just going to go to some questions before we complete. So from the group, and maybe rather than like reading charts in detail, if there's specific questions, maybe we can just speak to kind of the archetypal principles. But question one is, how does James see the square from Pluto, ironically, in Aquarius squaring Humaya in Scorpio over the next 2 years, playing out for healing and humanity?
Well, that's a good question that the person who's asking the question probably enlightened me about, because Humaya, I think they're referring to a planetoid there, or an
Yeah,
asteroid.
they've actually said a dwarf planet of regeneration and rebirth.
Yeah, dwarf planet. Yeah, so there's planets out there that have not yet come to a consensus, like an astrological community. It takes some time. Like Pluto was discovered, Neptune was discovered. It took some time for each of those to come to a consensus. It really takes research, actually, like how it shows up in the charts. There's some aspect of the myth that was chosen for it, like what that represents. There's definitely a lot of research. Like we have to look at people that have it in their charts, how it shows up in their lives. So I wish I could say, I can't. Like there's, I'm not even beyond Eris at this point. So I think like one of the more, I guess you could say earlier, newer planetoids that was discovered is Eris. And so, I haven't even gotten beyond that, but it's obviously a very potent combination. It was there in the square, in the great big square we had in 2020. There was a triple conjunction of Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto, and Capricorn square to Uranus and Aries, and then Eris was also there with Uranus and Aries. So one day we'll know more, but Aries is the goddess of discord in Greco-Roman mythology, and my sense is that there's maybe something there that's a little bit like a little bit of a higher resonance of Jupiter. Jupiter is the archetype of, so Jupiter was the king of the gods. That was Zeus, and Jupiter is the largest planet. And Jupiter as an archetype is associated with the archetype of the larger whole, of kind of bringing the disparate pieces together into a larger view that encompasses and makes sense of things, and a sense of like abundance, growth, expansion. And my sense is like Eris maybe works towards that end, but through initially creating the opposite, like discord.
Yeah, it's interesting. Actually,
sake of
she
it.
did provide some context, which I didn't read. So she said, I feel like I'm drowning in deep emotions and increased heightened sensitivity that's becoming unbearable. I'm meditating and grounding on a daily basis, but feeling very overwhelmed, exhausted, and wired with insomnia. Humaya was opposing my natal Chiron when I was born, so wondering if this time is right for transformational healing.
Gosh, I wish I knew. It's such a to get a new archetype, man. That's like a new treasure box. I wish I knew, honestly. But I would say, my kind of pointing around that would be, it sounds like they are familiar with their birth chart. That's one piece. The next piece is the transits, like what transits are like. For instance, is Pluto squaring anything in your birth chart? So that would be like a transit.
Yes.
Essentially is like,
She also said Humaya is conjunct my natal Neptune at 4 Scorpio, 12th house with Pluto squaring.
Okay, so Pluto square Neptune. Okay. Yeah, it would. I mean, we probably have to look at it, but it's, yeah. I mean, for those that don't know, like when you look at transits, what you're doing is you're looking at where the planets are in the sky at any certain point of time. Most people want to look at now. So like where a planet is now in the sky in relation to where the planets were when you were born. So like when she says that Pluto's square to Neptune, it means that Pluto in the sky is in a 90-degree angle to the position that Neptune was when they were born. So that would be, that's kind of the context for that. We'd have to look at the chart because, yeah, it sounds like there's a lot going on there. There's probably a lot of, significant transits there. Like, I mean, Saturn transits are just so significant. Those are like really significant. Transits, Pluto transits are super significant. I mean, all the transits are really significant, but like if you're really going through a tough time, there's probably going to be some Saturn in there somewhere.
She did ask another question, actually. So let me just ask, see what you think of this. As so much of the healing process is related to the mother wound, how does James see the role of Ceres, the nurturing mother archetype, playing out in the field of healing our childhood wounds?
Let me just begin by saying whoever's asking this question is definitely on the forefront, the cutting edge of astrology, because they're coming up with all the archetypes that are just getting defined now. Ceres is interesting because Ceres is definitely like a planet. I mean, it's very small, but I don't know, but Ceres was the goddess of grain. And there seems to be something that I've observed and others have observed that is something having to do with Ceres in the chart that has to do with like orientation towards plants, gardening. There's something there kind of linked up with like the plant world. There's more, archetypes are much more richer than just something like that. But that's something that I've observed, other people have observed. So, I mean, you're also dealing with like herbal like remedies as well, right? So
Yeah, it's
Ceres.
interesting the mention of the plant queendom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
also the Ceres, just interesting. I don't know if this is eventually going to tie into the archetype as we understand it, but Ceres was the mother of she was the mother of the goddess who was abducted by Pluto, Persephone. So she was the mother of Persephone, and Pluto abducted Persephone. That's one of the Greek myths that's like
Interesting.
so crystallizes the archetype of Pluto, because what happens there is that Persephone, which was the most beautiful goddess in that particular narrative, gets taken by Pluto via a cave because he can't really come out of the underworld. Maybe she got enticed into it or something. He abducts her into the underworld, claims her as his bride, and then Ceres goes the world over looking for her daughter. And the idea there is that it illustrates a lot about Pluto and may illustrate something about Ceres as well. It's like, because Pluto, whatever Pluto aspects in the birth chart and even in transits, it tends to abduct them into the underworld. It tends to take them into the underworld where they undergo a kind of a transformation. A transformation narrative is invitation is there in that person's life. Like the example of Persephone is, that was the Greek myth for the changing of the seasons, because Persephone embodied the beauty of life and when it's in flower. So like spring, summer, flowers, fruits, like the beauty and pleasure of life. And then she's abducted in the underworld. Eventually, Ceres finds her. They come up with something where Persephone is above the ground half the year, below the ground half the year. So when she's below the ground, that's when the fall and the winter, all the color drains out of things. And that connotes in Pluto this death rebirth cyclic thing that's associated with Pluto. So that's one of the ways the Greeks like really were able to capture this archetype in like pretty clearly. And then in terms of Ceres, or another name is Demeter, it's like I don't know, she is the grain. She is the grain that dies, like that in the fall and the winter, but is reborn again. She searches for her daughter, so she's there in the myth. She's also associated with the first ever potential use of psychedelics as a depth healing process in the West, because there was the Eleusinian mysteries in ancient Greece, in which there was thought to be a kind of like a mold, a fungus that grows on the grain that they make a drink out of, and it would be this right. It had lysergic acid in it. It would be a right kind of psychedelic assisted healing. So anyway, so Siri's all bound up in that. Plants, medicine, gardening. Anyways, I'll leave it there.
Yeah, gorgeous. And yeah, there is a final question, but again, I don't know whether it's like cutting edge. So I'll ask it anyway. We'll see. Karma and Dharma. If you have planets squaring the nodal axis, creating a grand cross, how would it be best to work with these archetypally for healing?
Yeah, the nodal axis. Again, you'll just to be like full disclosure of like archetypal astrology and all the different branches of astrology. There are branches of astrology that use the nodes much more than archetypal astrology,
Yeah.
like evolutionary astrology. Also, medical astrology really uses the nodes a lot. They're huge in medical astrology. So, the short answer is I don't feel I can necessarily say. Like there's with the nodes, there's kind of an understanding that the south node is more like where we're coming from. The north node is where we're going to. Which sign the south node is, which sign the north node is, which planet is aligned with the south node, which planet is aligned with the north node. The nodes, by the way, are the eclipse points. That's just a point in the sky where the sun and the moon, when they pass each other, they line up and they eclipse. So yeah, I would say for both the people that asked both those questions, for what I have to offer, I would say if you look at your birth chart and you look at the classical archetypes, those classical archetypes, if they're understood, at the depth that they present, can give a very robust picture of both the scenarios. Like on one scenario, we have a person who's asking like, what's going on with me right now? That'd be a little bit more like transits, but it's still, if you look at just the classic archetypes, you'll get some real clear, both clarity on what you're going through and kind of prescriptive guidance about how to work with that. On the other side, the karmic stuff about past lives, if you look at your birth chart and you look at the angles there to the classic archetype. So, the sun, the moon, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Mars, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto. Those are classical in terms of archetypal astrology. If you look at those and you look at all the alignments there, it's going to paint a picture for you of tension and themes and symbolic tension that are there represented in your life. When people have past life experiences, my observation has been that what they are experiencing is the same archetypal tensions in a previous iteration. So it's not like it's kind of like it's kind of like the birth chart that we're born with is a play. It's like like what they have in sports, like a play, a drawing of the play ahead, which is coming from where you last were. So they're not, it's not like in this past life, you had this totally different thing. And then in this one, we're still working through the same stuff. And when we resolve the archetypal tensions in this life, as exhibited in your chart, you're also resolving for past, you're resolving for The healing process is non-linear in terms of
Mm,
temporality.
mm,
You can, and then similarly, if you have an experience of a past life, sometimes that experience of resolving the past life can also make us feel that we resolved the tensions of our current life.
mm.
They're not going to be different necessarily. If anything, looking at the chart can give us a sense of both. You can give us a sense of what we're kind of what we're the adventure of this life, and also the adventure of the past life. And then knowing the archetypes can help, because the past life won't look exactly the same as this life, but symbolically, if we understand the
Yeah.
symbolism, we'll see. Symbolically, it's the same. It's the same tension. It's the same
Mm,
reconciliation that's being asked there. And ultimately, honestly, my experience, it's going towards what we talked about earlier, like stepping onto the other side of the personal wound and opening up one's
mm,
heart. Like when we really are identified with our wounds, nothing wrong with that. Sometimes we need to be identified with it to kind of unravel the thread of the narrative and
mhm,
understand our composition, as it were. But, as we understand, we begin to step on the other side. We begin to see our wounding as archetypal wounding, as
mm.
human wounding, as life. It's not like, oh, this is me. It's assigned to my name. I'm so attached to it. It's like, oh, this is life. This is life. This is what happens in life. This is what happens through birth. This is what happens to everybody, you know,
Mm.
and then the heart really opens up, and then really resolution can start happening on like mega level resolutions, in terms of present life stuff, past life stuff, because that's one of the main messages to get in this incarnate in any incarnation, is to get
Mm.
like this sense that through my wounding, I'm on the human journey. I'm on the archetypal journey. I'm sure I have a name and a unique identity, but having that name and unique identity should all the more make me identify with other people, because they have the same thing. They're so convinced of their
Mm.
unique identity too.
I love
Um,
that. I love
yeah.
that. And also, just I know the person who asked that question, and so I know what you've just shared is going to be really impactful for her. So thank you so much for sharing that and all your wisdom. Like I absolutely love your work. I think all the secret witches are going to be heading to get their thing on your website. So where can people find you, and also what are you working on at the moment? If there's anything you'd love to share.
Um, yeah, what I'm working on at the moment, is that what you asked?
Yeah, and where people can find you.
Yeah, so they can find me just jamesmoran.org online. And then if you go to my website, you'll see at the banner on the top, there's a Know Your Tense Alignments link.
Mhm.
If you click on that, and then you kind of like input your birth data, and you input your email, you'll get that report.
Perfect.
Otherwise on the website, there's kind of like pre-recorded courses, ebooks, things like that. What I'm working on right now is I'm actually working on publishing more. So I write nonfiction that's focused on astrology. I also write fiction, which is thematically focused on the same stuff.
Mhm.
Um, and I publish articles, I publish stories. Now I'm more like publishing books. So that's kind of where I'm at currently, is working on the book length publications, and those some of them are a bit more of what we were talking about in the beginning, which is like more like larger worldview stuff, like
Mm.
um kind of creating a bridge, creating a stepping stone for understanding, for going from understanding the universe as a material universe to understanding the universe as actually um play of consciousness that has a purpose behind it. Because if it's really just a material universe that's kind of like just random and mechanical, any sense of purpose is more like something that we conjure inside, again, inside just like our brains.
Mm. Mm.
And we just, if it's applied to life, it's just projected onto life. But
Yes.
where I'm going with this is that the universe, its creation, our births, our lives have a action. there's a purpose behind it. There is an actual meaning. There's a purpose. We come into this life not because we're just born and molecules interacted and we just happen to be conscious. Actually, consciousness and kind of the evolution of us as people and our understanding, the opening of our heart, is fundamental to the purpose of creation itself. Yeah.
I feel like we could do a whole other episode on that. Thank you so much. I absolutely love this conversation. It's definitely one of my favorites. So yeah, it's been
Oh, thank
absolutely
you,
great to
Nicole.
have you here.
Oh, thank you for inviting me. I mean, it's just so pleasant and so wonderful, and I appreciate you very much. So thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. I absolutely loved that episode with James. Here are my key takeaways. Our most painful life chapters aren't mistakes, they are archetypal initiations, carrying the very strengths and gifts we came here to reclaim. Archetypal astrology is not about prediction or certainty, but about restoring meaning, helping us understand why our lives unfolded the way they did and what is trying to be born through that. The birth chart is not fate. It is a mirror of our psyche and soul, revealing core tensions that become sources of power when we can consciously integrate them. Wounds are not personal failures, but archetypal experiences. When we step to the other side of them, they dissolve isolation and reconnect us to our shared humanity and gifts. Pluto, the underworld archetype, offers an insight into the witch, illuminating why shame, secrecy, and fear often guard our deepest magic, and how descent is the pathway to transformation and reclaimed power. Working with planetary cycles and lunar rhythms helps us move with life's intelligence rather than against it, turning chaos into coherence and initiation into agency.